Good evening, dear listeners. It's me again, Luna. I hope your lights are dim and your imagination is ready, because tonight's tale will make your heart skip a beat. Have you ever heard a song that seemed alive? A melody so beautiful and yet so wrong that it followed you even in silence. Tonight's story is called The Melody of the Cursed Violin. But before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that little bell, so you'll never miss another spine-tingling story. Ready? Then let's turn the page. And listen closely. Because once you hear this tune, it never leaves you. The Melody of the Cursed Violin. In the old town of Weatherfield, there was a narrow street filled with antique shops and broken lamps that flickered in the fog. Among them stood Adeline's Antiques, a place said to hold relics from another age. 12-year-old Elias Greer, a shy boy with a passion for music, often wandered through that shop, mesmerized by dusty instruments hanging on the walls. His dream was to own a real violin, not the cracked toy one he practiced on. One evening, as the fog thickened, he found himself in front of Adeline's door once again. Inside, a faint glow illuminated an old violin resting on a velvet cushion. Its wood was dark as midnight. Its strings shimmered faintly like silver threads. The old shopkeeper, Madame Adeline, watched him with deep, knowing eyes. "Ah, I see you've found her," she whispered. "The violin that sings by itself." Elias laughed nervously. "By itself?" Adeline nodded slowly. "Play it at midnight, and it will play you back." Before he could ask more, she wrapped it carefully and said, "For you, dear boy. No charge. But remember, never play its melody under a full moon." Elias thanked her and hurried home, thinking it was just a ghost story meant to scare him. That night, rain drummed softly on the window. Elias couldn't resist. He took out the violin, tuned the strings, and placed it under his chin. The bow glided once, and the room trembled. The melody was haunting, delicate, and full of sorrow. His hands seemed to move on their own, drawing sounds he didn't know he could create. But as the last note lingered, a whisper filled the air. "Play. Again." Elias froze. His reflection in the window was no longer alone. Behind him stood the faint outline of a woman in a tattered black gown, her eyes hollow, her lips moving silently to the music. He dropped the bow and stumbled back, but the violin kept playing on its own, strings moving as if alive. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the music. Outside, the wind howled like laughter. The next morning, Elias brought the violin to school. His best friend Nora begged him to play. When he did, the melody began again, only now it was different, darker. It made everyone around them uneasy. Nora felt dizzy. The windows rattled. After class, their teacher, Mr. Carrington, pulled Elias aside. "Where did you get that violin?" he asked sharply. "That tune. I've heard it before." Mr. Carrington explained that long ago, a composer named Lucien Veyraud had written The Requiem of Souls, a piece so mournful it was said to open a door between the living and the dead. When he played it for the first time, the theatre collapsed, killing the entire audience. Elias felt sick. Could his violin be Lucian's? That night, unable to sleep, he searched inside the case. Beneath the velvet lining, he found a letter. "To whoever dares awaken my song, your soul shall join the chorus before the final dawn." Elias's hands trembled. He looked outside. The full moon had risen. The clock struck midnight. The violin began to play again, by itself, pulling Elias from his bed. He followed the sound into the old music hall down the street, abandoned for years. Inside, cobwebs hung from the balcony and broken seats lined the floor. Yet candles flickered across the stage, forming a path. At the centre stood Lucien Veyraud, pale and ghostly, holding an identical violin. "You've finished what I began," Lucien said, smiling faintly. "Play with me, and you'll never be alone again." Elias tried to run, but the violin rose into the air, strings glowing. His hands were pulled forward by invisible force. Together they played, the living and the dead, as spectral figures filled the seats, clapping silently. The music grew louder, swirling with screams and cries until suddenly Nora burst through the doors. "Elias!" "Stop!" Her voice cut through the chaos. Elias dropped the bow, breaking the spell. The phantom howled and dissolved into shadow. The violin fell to the stage with a lifeless thud. The next morning, the violin was gone. Only ashes remained. Elias and Nora returned to Adeline's shop, but it was empty, dusty, abandoned, as if it hadn't been open in years. On the counter lay one final note. "Music is the voice of the soul. But beware what kind of soul is singing back." Elias never touched another violin again. Yet sometimes when the wind passed through Hollow Street, a faint melody echoed. Soft, sorrowful, eternal. And so, dear listeners, the cursed melody fades, but not the memory. Remember, our talents can lift us to beauty or drag us into darkness. It all depends on what we choose to play. If you enjoyed this haunting harmony, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for more stories that sing from the shadows. Until next time, my moonlit friends, keep your ears open, but your soul guarded. Good night.